Everybody. Hello, friends, and welcome to our SBT Sutra Studies class. My name is Venerable Tarpa, and before we begin, like usual, let's take a moment to appreciate our wonderful community gathered here today. Today, I feel fortunate to sit as a member of this kind community in the safety and security of like-minded friends, sharing this present moment with others dedicated to the cultivation of goodness. Today, I'm grateful for the direction and support that this community provides, a community worthy of my time and commitment, a community where my efforts have meaning, purpose, and are appreciated. Today, I'm thankful for this community of awakening, a place to gain the knowledge and skills to improve my life, a family, a home, and a sanctuary for all of us seeking refuge from the storm. And let's remember, as conscientious practitioners, we must recognize our responsibility to the world, to strive to live skillfully while helping others to do the same, to strive to live in balance and harmony with nature and others, to strive to gain mastery over our minds and embody our true benevolent nature, to expand our hearts and minds, transcending our shared human limitations, to not intentionally harm sentient life or our planet, to maturely accept and embrace the reality of our situation while striving to improve it. Again, welcome everybody to our SBT Sutra study class. We are currently examining the Dhammapada, the legendary text. Today, we're going to be covering chapter 16, entitled The Deer or Affection. Kind of a strange title to this one. And Gil Fransdale explains, he calls it the deer for that which we hold dear. And each text kind of has a little bit of a different title. And looking through the group, Catherine, would you like to do some reading today? Are you good for that? Ms. Pema, are you good for a little bit of reading? And Neil, are you still good? Okay. And Darcy's here as well. Darcy, can you do some reading? You're blacked out. Maybe you're busy making muffins or something. You're muted, dear. I don't know if she could do this.
I'm having
She can't even figure out the mute button, everybody.
I can't focus really well today, so I was hoping to beg off of reading, but I'm here.
Yeah, we got 3.
Okay.
That's fine.
Thank you.
You always do such a lovely job. Okay, with that said, let's put some stuff on the screen here. I feel like a game show host. On the board, we have these. So yeah, interesting. This chapter is called Pleasure by Gaden Shirpal. Buddha Rakita calls it Affection, and Gil Fransdale calls it The Deer. So it's quite interesting. Our first is 3 verses. So let's do all 3. Catherine, would you like to start us off with these 3?
When you disengage yourself from practice and join yourself to what is ill applied, you link up only with your own attachments. By grasping at pleasure, you lose sight of your aim. Do not keep company with pleasure. Do not consort with pain. The absence of pleasure is misery, and so is the presence of pain. Do not aim at pleasure, for the loss of pleasure is hell. Not ever grasping at pleasure, you will never be bound by its chains.
That was done lovely. Neil, would you like to read the next 3? 209, 210, and 211?
Giving himself to things to be shunned and not exerting where exertion is needed, a seeker after pleasures, having given up his true welfare, envies those intent upon theirs. Seek no intimacy with those beloved, and also not with the unloved. For not to see the beloved and to see the unloved, both are painful. Therefore hold nothing dear, for separation from the dear is painful. There are no bonds for those who have nothing beloved, or unloved.
Beautiful job. Miss Spain, would you like to do the next three? Starting here.
Practicing what one shouldn't, not practicing what one should, having abandoned the goal, clinging to what is dear, one comes to envy those who practice. Don't get entangled with what you long for or dislike. Not seeing what you long for is suffering. So also is seeing what you dislike. Therefore, do not turn anything into something longed for then it's dreadful to lose. Without longing or dislike, no bonds exist.
I think there's some nice poetry in the first three. And to me, it just comes back to the definition of suffering in Buddhism. It's not getting what we want or getting what we don't want. And that's basically what they're talking about. And they're also talking about that it's the extremes that we really suffer, right? So I think it was in Gaden Shirpal's on do not aim at pleasure, for the loss of pleasure is hell. Not ever grasping at pleasure, you will never be bound to its claims. So though they're a little bit encryptive, when you first read them, it seems like they're telling us just to not look at pleasure of any kind. And of course, first we'd have to define what they mean by pleasure, which they don't do, and they don't do in any of the notes. There's wholesome pleasures and there's unwholesome pleasures, right? You can want worldly things like money and power and things, or sensual pleasures, which can be virtuous and non-virtuous, or you can look to great pleasures that come from practice, from our practice of appreciation. We talk about all the joy everybody's feeling, all the happiness, it's a pleasure there. So do they mean, when they talk about pleasure in the Dhammapada, are they always talking about sensual pleasures? I don't have the answer to that, but I'm going to guess that that's what they're talking about, because there are so many virtuous pleasures that we don't need to stay away from. But it does become clear that what they're talking about is not being attached and grasping at pleasures, right? And of course, or we could also look at the three poisons of attachment, aversion, and ignorance, right? Attachment to pleasures of what we want, aversion to what we don't want. These are the things that keep us locked in samsara. Wonderful. You guys did a great job of reading. Neil, would you like to start here on, we have a few, let's just read a couple at a time. You want to read the first two, 212 and 213?
From pleasure arises misery. From pleasure arises fear. In giving up your pleasure, you will be freed from misery and fear. From attachment arises misery. From attachment arises fear. In giving up your attachment, you will be freed from a misery from misery and fear.
And I remember this one. It keeps going on in the same style. So can you keep reading, Neil?
From infatuation arises misery. From infatuation arises fear. In giving up your infatuation, you'll be freed from misery and fear. From desire arises misery. From desire arises fear. In giving up your desires, you will be freed from misery and fear. From craving arises misery. From craving arises fear. In giving up your craving, you will be freed from the misery and fear.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. And Miss Catherine, would you like to read this 212 through 216, I think?
From endearment springs grief. From endearment springs fear. From him who is wholly free from endearment, there is no grief. Whence then fear? From affection springs grief. From affection springs fear. From him who is wholly free from affection, there is no grief. Whence then fear? From attachment springs grief. From attachment springs fear. From him who is wholly free from attachment, there is no grief. Hence then fear. From lust springs grief. From lust springs fear. From him who is wholly free from craving, there is no grief. Whence then fear? From craving springs grief. From craving springs fear. From him who is wholly free from craving, there is no grief. Whence then fear?
Thank you. Do the English use the word whence anymore?
No.
Thank you. Ms. Payne, would you like to start right here at 212 and just read through 216?
Longing gives rise to grief. Longing gives rise to fear. For someone released from longing, there is no grief. And from where would come fear?
Can you speak up just a little bit?
Affection gives rise to grief. Affection gives rise to fear. For someone released from affection, there is no grief. And from where would come fear? Infatuation gives rise to grief. Infatuation gives rise to fear. For someone released from infatuation, there is no grief. And from where would come fear? Sensual craving gives rise to grief. Sensual craving gives rise to fear. For someone released from sensual craving, there is no grief. And from where would come fear? Craving gives rise to grief. Craving gives rise to fear. For someone released from craving, there is no grief. And from where would come fear?
Excellent job. Some of the adjectives are, or qualities are quite interesting. So we start here. So these things that we're supposed to be giving up on, one of them's pleasure, the other one's attachment, infatuation, desire, and craving. We have this one, which is endearment, affection, attachment, lust, craving. They're all a little different. And here we have affection, infatuation, sensual desires, sensual craving. And yeah, and isn't it interesting that they separate sensual craving from craving? So sensual craving would be the craving of the senses, for music, for fine food, for intimate experience. Or craving could be many things. Craving could be craving to be reborn again. Craving could be for wealth and power. There's a lot of different things that can happen. So, but I think we can kind of wrap all these up into one kind of idea that, again, it's not the things in our lives that are the problems, it's our relationship to them. So we have longing, and all these various qualities. They can all be virtuous and non-virtuous, right? Longing to see your teacher, is can be seen as at least a bit more virtuous than longing for sensual pleasures or things like that. Affection. Of course, affection's a wonderful thing, right? Affection for Sangha members, your teacher, your family, your friends, your children. And so we have to be clear, they're not painting a negative picture of a lot of these qualities, even sensual desire, to appreciate a good meal, to love a beautiful Mozart quintet piece. Inherently, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, it's a relationship to them. So I would say, and this is just my take, that it's really much more about craving, attachment, craving, and grasping. And funny, we're going to be studying that this week. On Monday, I think we get into the the quality of grasping. So again, it's kind of an interesting thing that our teachings kind of align themselves. Last week it was happiness. This week it's going to be the idea of grasping and craving and attachment. And so again, I think that this is what we have to be careful of in the Dhammapada. For whatever the reasons, a lot of this wisdom is given to us in a binary, dualistic way. Maybe the Buddha did it because, remember, this is the Bronze Age. Maybe, he had to put things in a very simple way for people to understand. But I think nowadays with our brilliant, modern, educated minds, we see beyond the binary, realizing everything is a spectrum. So all of these qualities, longing, we can long for so many virtuous things. You can long for your loved ones. Affection is a wonderful quality. Infatuation, oftentimes in Buddhism, they would call that passion. That tends to be frowned upon in Buddhism. So I would think that that's a bit of a negative, would we consider a negative quality. Sensual cravings, they're not, the attachment to them is frowned upon, but I think that the Buddha probably appreciated a good meal. And craving. So that's my take on this. It's that attachment to these things brings grief and the rising of fear. Why does attachment bring grief? Because when we're attached to things, we have high expectations. And of course, not getting them brings us grief. But even when we get them, according to Buddhism, once like you have a beautiful meal and you achieve this, and you think, well, what a lovely thing. But then the meal's over and you're sad because the meal's finished, right? All of our pleasures arise. They're all impermanent. So Buddhism says that's why it considers even pleasure, all aspects of pleasure, inside them is the seeds of suffering, right? You have a great meal. Well, the next day you want that great meal again, but you can't have it, right? So these are some of the ideas that Buddhism has about why we suffer even from pleasure. And then these things give rise to fear. And that fear could be the fear of not getting it, the fear of getting it and it not being the right type of what you want. So that's the idea of how that works. Anybody have any questions about that? I hope I explained that fairly well. It's kind of a long topic in Buddhism of why. We're going to be getting into that in secular Buddhist essentials of exactly why is it our pleasures and the things we want have a seed of suffering in them. And a great deal of it is just that they're impermanent. We want that delicious chocolate bar to last our whole lifetime and not make us fat and not rot out our teeth and not give us diabetes. That's a good plan right there. Okay, enough of that. Let's get back to it. And Neil, would you like to read 2:17?
World delights in those with vision and integrity. Those who do what it is right to do, who abide in the Dharma and speak only the truth.
And of course, that is Neil right there. That's a perfect description of him. Catherine, 2:17.
People hold dear him who embodies virtue and insight, who is principled, has realized the truth, and who himself does what he ought to be doing.
And I give everybody permission to substitute the word her for him anytime you want, because that's not fair. Because that describes Catherine beautifully. And 2:17, Miss Pema.
People hold dear those who have done their own work, complete in virtue and wisdom, established in the Dhamma, and who speak the truth.
Isn't that nice, huh? So what they're saying is people appreciate good practitioners who are virtuous and wise and have vision and were wonderful people and who speak the truth. We know that. People that hold their vows, right? And I think it was 218 I thought was quite, one of these I thought was quite interesting. Neil, would you like to read this one, 218?
Striving for the inexpressible, the mind becomes completely clear. When thoughts turn away from desire, you are said to be moving upstream.
Great. The inexpressible is nirvana, and I'll explain moving upstream in a few minutes here. Catherine, 218.
One who is intent upon the ineffable nirvana dwells with mind inspired by supermundane wisdom and is no more bound by sense pleasures. Such a man or woman is called one bound upstream.
Thank you. And Miss Pam, it starts up here on this page and then finishes in the next.
Anyone who aspires to the indescribable, whose mind is expansive, and whose heart is not bound to sensual craving, is called one bound upstream.
Okay, so they're talking about somebody who's a great practitioner. They're not caught up in all of those desires and infatuations and everything else we talked about. Or we actually said they're not caught up in attachment for these things, right? I mean, the Buddha had affection for his students. They talked about when his two main disciples passed away in his lifetime for natural causes. He talked about how sad he was and how the Sangha felt empty. So the Buddha clearly had great affection for everyone, but I have a feeling that he could deal with it well because he didn't have attachment to it. This term bound upstream, they're talking about someone who's attained the third stage of awakening. In the Theravada tradition, they have something called the 4 stages of awakening. This corresponds to the Mahayana's 4 types of nirvana. And so the first one is, they call it stream enterer, and this is a certain attainment when in practice. And then once returner means that in your next lifetime, you only have one more lifetime before you're going to be an arhat, the highest of all practitioners. The third one is non-returner. It means at death, you're going to be an arhat. And then 4 is the arhat himself. So that's what that is. And I think that that's all I wanted to comment on. Wonderful.
Tarpa, you've got a question?
Please.
I do not have an understanding of expansive mind. What does this mean? That's from John.
Sure. So an expansive mind is a mind that's awakening. As we awaken to our true value, our true potential, our true nature, our mind expands. A mind that understands the Dharma, a mind that has grown, has understands itself, it's developing these qualities. So the Buddhist path is a path of expanding our minds to the point of reaching nirvana. And, we use that language nowadays, don't we? We talk about people having a little mind or a broad mind, expansive intelligence. It's language we use to this day. Little-minded. I won't mention the people that say that about me. No, just kidding. Okay, Neil, would you like to read our last 2? This is a short chapter.
When the wanderer returns safely home from a distant journey, his close and dear friends greet his arrival with great joy. When the good man passes from this world into the next, he is welcomed by his good works, like a traveller welcomed home by his kin.
Well said. Catherine, 219 and 220.
When, after a long absence, a person safely returns from afar, their relatives, friends, and well-wishers welcome them home on arrival. As kinsmen welcome a dear one on arrival, even so their good old Their own good deeds will welcome the doer of good, who has gone from this world to the next.
Beautiful job, Catherine. You moved past the binary by using the term person, and I do in my writing as well. And I believe that monastics are non-binary. We're trying to be the best of both. We try to, as bodhisattvas, we try to be universal mothers. And what's your name again? Pema. Okay. I've only known her forever. Let's do that 219 and 220. It's in one verse in this one.
Relatives, friends, and companions rejoice when a long absent person returns from afar. Just so, in passing from this world to the next, the merit we have made receives us, as a family does the return of a beloved relative.
Quite pretty, isn't it? And so the idea here is, especially in the second part of this verse, that they're referring to rebirth. But as secular Buddhists, we can also see this as just moment to moment, right? So the moment that we're in right now, our next moment is already paved with our karma, our merit, our potential, right? The things that you've done in creating your life, meaning the skills you've gained, the education you've received, the hard work you've done, the money you saved, the house that you've made for yourself, the friends and family that you've worked at propagating, and all of these things that are you. They're the residue of all your efforts, right? This awaits you in every moment. So we don't walk into the next moment blind. This is the idea. This is the idea of karma for me, that all of these things that I named, there's a momentum that's created by these things. So we accomplish these things, and that momentum paves the way for the future. So every moment you're walking into that moment that's already paved with your good intentions, with your merit, or the opposite if you're a naughty one. So it works both ways, yeah? So I thought that was really pretty. Hey, a little bit of a short verse, short chapter this week. Would anybody like to talk about anything? I'm going to take this down for a second so I can see everybody. I'll put it up if we need. John, did you understand the understanding of expansive mind?
Every time I've asked that question, I've gotten a vastly different answer from every monk that I've asked it to. I much more appreciate your answer than I do theirs, but they want to ascribe it to some kind of meditative state where you're in, that you have an expanded or a contracted mind. And it's some element of meditation itself is what I mostly get from the monks. And I've never understood that concept. I don't experience anything like that.
Everything in our lives that we do, including our meditation and practices, they add to this expansive mind. When you meditate and you learn things from meditation experientially, when you become calmer, when you practice insight meditation, and you really do see a bigger world, right? How about our practice of appreciation this week? Man, did that create an expansive awareness, huh? Many of us were saying, we're looking at the world like we haven't seen it before. We're noticing all these little things, right? Sometimes I'll call it peripheral vision or peripheral awareness. But it's all this idea of expanding, from a small-minded point of view where, like some fathers, they only eat meat and potatoes and they don't like foreigners, and that little mindset. We grow with education, with meditation, with practice, through experiences, through travel. There's so many things that expand our consciousness. Some people can go through life and just never really expand their consciousness. They can, again, just have that regular job that they go to every day, eat the same food every day. They're just not interested in anything new. That's a consciousness that's not expansive, that's not growing. right? And I'm not making fun of that. If that's what people want, they've freedom to do so. But in Buddhism, we're trying to expand our minds, and this includes expanding our wisdom and our insight, expanding our compassion, our understanding, our generosity, our appreciation, all of our qualities. We're making them bigger, we're making them better, we're making them more skillful, more productive.
I like your definition much better than the ones I've heard from others. But I think
Thank you.
a lot of it comes from the fact I have Asperger's, so I don't see the world the way everyone else does anyway. And maybe I just already have that quality and don't understand it, but I'm reaching for something outside what I already know and I don't find it.
Yeah, you could have an extraordinary way of looking at the world. One of our monks at Sarah had Asperger's, and but he was brilliant. He had like a photographic memory.
I do too.
And yeah, he got, they do a contest, 5,000 monks. They do a contest for, I forget what they call the title, but they get to wear a big cloak and walk around, and they're the highest in the studies of the whole monastery. He was the first Westerner to ever get it. But he was also, as you know, he had challenges, right?
Oh, yeah.
He had challenges working with people. And so, but yeah. So it
Yeah,
sounds
and-
like
and
you have
having
a
that
very
kind of memory.
interesting life.
Having that kind of a memory is a curse too. It really is.
Yeah. I would go with that curse for a while. I think
Oh, you
photographic
don't.
memory would be pretty
I
cool.
never forget anything. It's not good. I do have a
Oh.
second question. In the
Please.
reading, you use the word spiritual a lot. And
Yeah.
in the context of a secular Buddhist tradition, what is meant by the word spiritual?
Are you, I really like Sam Harris's presentation on it. Do you know Sam Harris?
Mhm.
So he's one of the outspoken atheists, but he likes the idea of taking back the term spiritual from the religious. And so we define spiritual, and I'm trying to think of what text we talk about. Karen, do you remember what text we define? Oh, it's in our secular Buddhist text. So you might want to download, we have a short text on Introduction to Secular Buddhism, and it defines these better than I'm going to. It defines what we mean by agnosticism, what we mean by spiritual, and it does a great job. But the idea of spirituality, I think the best way to define it is that very popular comment people make. They say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. So a spiritual person, and Sam Harris also appreciates this definition, is a person who's not tied into a certain religion, but he's still in awe and wonder of the universe and how much we don't know, right? And just the magic of existence itself. That's the idea. And to us, it's an almost spiritual experience. It's a person who sees beyond the mundane. They believe that there's something bigger than ourselves and our knowledge that we know today. Now, the spiritual person doesn't have to have a name for that. They can be agnostic like we are. They don't have to call it something.
Yeah, I just find often when you use the word in conversation, the word spiritual has about a definition base that's huge, and everyone means something different when they're using it. As far as the awe, yeah, it's more of a psychological, maybe the right word would be a psychological kind of attribute, but I understand. Thank you.
And you'll find that I don't use words frivolously. I use the words that I use often like that, you'll find they're defined somewhere in our text. And I painstakingly write down exactly what I mean by that. So, yeah, I didn't really feel like I was using it that often, but maybe it's
Yeah, you
subconscious.
were, and the one, yeah, you were.
Are you sure you're remembering it correctly?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Of course, he doesn't forget anything. Oh, no.
Well, it's a myth that you don't forget anything, but when you do remember things, you tend to remember in detail other people's don't. Like
Oh,
I don't use bookmarks. I always remember what page you left off on.
Oh, I'm waiting for this. I know 3 weeks from now. August 27th. There you said.
That's
And
an
I'll say,
excellent-
okay, John, I guess I did. I can't argue with you. Thank you, John.
No, thank you for answering so well, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome. Would anybody else have questions, comments, or insights into our talk today? Flabbergasted, are you?
Tarpa,
Jennifer.
could you please repeat for me again?
Yeah.
The indescribable, the stream enterer, once returner. I just want to make sure I have that correct.
I sure will. So the indescribable is one of the terms they use for nirvana. So
Okay.
that's an easy one. And the term they use the word bound upstream, meaning that a person is moving upstream, right? This comes from Theravada's take on the 4 stages of awakening. And those are stream enterer, once returned, non-returning, and arhat. Wikipedia has a nice page on it. And in Mahayana Buddhism, they're linked to the 4 kinds of nirvana. And there's nirvana with residue, nirvana without residue, and parinirvana or something like that. Yeah. If I don't have John's gift. Okay, how about we wrap it up? I'll give you a little concluding piece. For those thinking of disengaging with their practice and the Buddhist path, or are losing their intention to practice well, the only thing awaits you is your own attachments, grasping, and afflictions, and envy for those still on the path. I'm quoting the Dhammapada. That isn't my view. 210 is, avoid and do not seek out extremes of pleasure and pain. Seek the contentment of the middle way path. And of course, lose your attachment to those things. Lose your attachment and thereby your grasping at whatever you deem dear. From longing arises grief and fear. Let me paraphrase this. From longing, from affection, from infatuation, from sensual desire, from craving arises grief and fear. Giving them up, you give up grief and fear. The world delights in authentic practitioners like SBT practitioners who possess virtue, insight, and integrity. Those who strive for liberation, whose minds are free of craving and grasping at sensual pleasures, is a person deeply in the process of awakening. It is our own good deeds and merit that paves the way for future awakened results. Does anyone have any questions or comments? It was a nice class, huh? It was short, but I liked the material very much. So everybody, remember that the sutra teachings are meant as practice instructions. So in order to get the greatest benefit, we need to engage fully with them, utilizing the 3 great objectives: study, contemplation, and meditation. Your work this week is to discover how these teachings apply to your daily life, transforming them from words on a page into living Dharma. Next week, we'll be moving on to chapter 17 of the Dhammapada, anger, and you better show up or else. Let's end today's meditation with our altruistic affirmation. May all be healthy, may all be prosperous, may all be well, may all be present, free of past regret and future worry. May all abide in constant appreciation, which is a source of great joy and contentment. May all realize their true nature and the true nature of reality, which is awakening. Thanks everybody for coming. Remember that the SBT community was created for one purpose and one purpose only, to support you, the practitioner. Thanks for coming, everybody. See you tomorrow. We have meditation and we have our skillful living class. Hope you can all make it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
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 Thank you, Tapa.
Bye-bye. Thanks to the
Thank you.
readers. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.